Today, I want to talk to those who may be going through hard times, going through rough times, going through rough patches in their lives. All I want to say is don't give up. Keep your heart. Have courage. And don't give up. Because what you're going through for a reason. The trials are just here just to strengthen you. To strengthen your spiritual man. Your spirit is the true you. And it needs to be worked out. The same way we physically work out. To strengthen our muscles. To strengthen our arms. To strengthen our legs. By doing rigorous activities and taxing activities. It's the same way that our spiritual man needs to be worked out. And the only way that we grow as spiritually is to go through adversity and go through trials. So as humans and spiritual beings, we need trials and adversity. Even though we may hate them, because it doesn't feel good while we're going through the pain. But some of the best things that has happened to us has been trials. When we're in a trial, it's teaching us something. Even though we may not understand that at the time. But after the fact, and after the pain, and after all the endurance, because you never gave up, you come out like gold, as burnt in a furnace. So I say, never give up. Always remember what God taught you in the darkness and the light. So I say, always remember to help God help you remember in the light what He taught you in the darkness. Just like Job in the Bible, who went through his tribulation. He lost everything. His kids were killed. His belongings were taken away. He lost everything, but still he trusted God. Regardless of what he was going through, he trusted. He trusted God because he knew that he was going through it for a reason. And that his trials and his tribulation, his hard comings could not break him. Even though Job never did anything wrong, the Bible says he was a perfect man in the eyes of God. But still he had hard times. So don't ever think that because you're going through something that you're a bad person. Sometimes bad things happen to good people. And in the spiritual realm, sometimes it may be that negative entity trying to test you. To see how strong you are. To test your grit. To see if you're going to break. But if you never give up, you will see the light at the end of the tunnel. Trust me. Just like Job did when he endured all his adversity and all his hardship. He received double for his trouble. He received more than what he lost because he endured. You may feel like it's a lost cause and there's no more hope. But just remember, if there's anything left, there's always hope. And even if one is telling you this, just remember that there's always hope. So you may have to strengthen yourself like David did of the Bible, who killed Goliath. David was a man of God behind his own heart. And he was hated by his own king, who sought to kill David because the people showed David more love than a king. And in the midst of his adversity, of the king trying to have him killed, David fled for his life, in fear of his life, with nowhere to go. David stayed in caves with men who were considered outcasts from society. But David strengthened himself. He strengthened himself in the midst of his hardships, even when no one else did, when no one else was around. So David, in his alone time, found peace with it. He found peace with God. So the same way that David, we need that alone time so we can hear God clearly. It's our time of molding. It's our time of pruning. Just like David in the end. David knew that he had come out. He'd come out polished as gold. And even in his hardships, David never gave up. He became king one day. So in the end, David just knew that his hardships were just lessons just to prepare him to be king one day. David never knew he would become king. All he did was just trust God in his adversity. So the same way that what God did for David, God is preparing you for some of you to become queens and kings. So don't shun your hardships. Don't shun what you're going through, because they come to make you strong. So never give up. Even Jesus, after his comfortability, was taken into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil and go through many hardships. But in the end, he endured, coming out stronger and wiser than he went in. Look at the birds. They don't worry about where their next meal is going to come from. They don't worry about where their shelter would be. They don't worry about what they're going to do next, because they know instinctively that God will provide. It's the same way for us spiritual beings. We have to know within ourselves instinctively that God will take care of us also in our hardships. And we have to know that in order to grow as a spiritual being, that these adversities are just spiritual weights, just to make us strong, just to give us endurance, like a long distance track runner. You have to know this within yourself. Just like the birds know this instinctively. They don't fret. So if God takes care of birds, how much more would he do for you? So again, to those who feel like giving up, I'm here to tell you, don't give up. I've been there. I've been in the darkness. I've been without shelter. I've been homeless. I've been on the street. So I know the pain that you may be going through. I understand it. I'm with you. God is with you. So don't give up. Endure your spiritual workout.
Today, I want to tell you 3 stories from my life. That's it. No big deal. Just 3 stories. The first story is about connecting the dots. I dropped out of Reed College after the first 6 months, but then stayed around as a drop-in for another 18 months or so before I really quit. So why'd I drop out? It started before I was born. My biological mother was a young, unwed graduate student, and she decided to put me up for adoption. She felt very strongly that I should be adopted by college graduates, so everything was all set for me to be adopted at birth by a lawyer and his wife. Except that when I popped out, they decided at the last minute that they really wanted a girl. So my parents, who were on a waiting list, got a call in the middle of the night asking, "We've got an unexpected baby boy. Do you want him?" They said, "Of course." My biological mother found out later that my mother had never graduated from college and that my father had never graduated from high school. She refused to sign the final adoption papers. She only relented a few months later when my parents promised that I would go to college. This was the start in my life. And 17 years later, I did go to college. But I naively chose a college that was almost as expensive as Stanford. And all of my working class parents' savings were being spent on my college tuition. After 6 months, I couldn't see the value in it. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and no idea how college was going to help me figure it out. And here I was, spending all of the money my parents had saved their entire life. So I decided to drop out and trust that it would all work out okay. It was pretty scary at the time, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. The minute I dropped out, I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me and begin dropping in on the ones that looked far more interesting. It wasn't all romantic. I didn't have a dorm room, so I slept on the floor in friends' rooms. I returned Coke bottles for the 5-cent deposits to buy food with. And I would walk the 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal a week at the Hare Krishna temple. I loved it. And much of what I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on. Let me give you one example. Reed College at that time offered perhaps the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label on every drawer was beautifully hand calligraphed. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in my life. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. And we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them. If I had never dropped out, I would have never dropped in on that calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart even when it leads you off the well-worn path, and that will make all the difference.